Welcome back to another episode of Rebel Driver's Garage. I am Scott, your host. I am working on, again, my 428 over there in the corner. I got to pull it out. On this episode, we are going to install the crankshaft. Okay? There's several steps to do it, and it's critical to take your time and be patient. And then there's that word again, patient. Take your time and be patient when you're assembling your engine. There's no rush in this point, unless you're, building a race car and you got to be there the next day. So, what we're going to do is I'm going to take you step by step. As you can see, the engine from the last episode, we painted the engine block and we installed the freeze plugs. So on this step, we're going to be putting in just the crankshaft, and I'll show you what we have to do for that. There are a few things that you need. Let me show you. Okay, so you obviously have your engine block here. The crankshaft is still sitting on the shelf over there in the bag. And this is plastic gauge. What it is basically it's a tape measurer for measuring the clearance of your bearing clearances between your crank and your bearings. And these are the main bearings. The two outer ones here are what they call your thrust bearings. They keep your cranks from going forward and backwards. On Chevys, they're on the back main cap, and on the Fords, they're usually in the middle. And some other engines, they are in the middle as well. These are from Molly Clevite. They're their P-Series bearings, which aren't the super high-dollar race bearings, but they will do for this. MS 8363P, and that dash 30 means that the crank has been turned 30 over. On a Ford 428 crank, 30 over is no big deal. I know people scream bloody murder, but that's fine. Let them. Everybody's an expert. Now, the plastic gauge is more than just this like tape measure. Inside of it, you'll find a tiny little string of plastic. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a little bit of that, set it on the bearing, and then set the crankshaft down on top of it, or actually put the crank in on the bearings dry. Then put plastic gauge on the bearing surfaces of the crankshaft, and then put the new bearing on top of that with the main caps. And then we're going to torque everything down, and then we're going to use these little lines here to measure the thousandths of an inch, because your bearing clearances are extremely important. So what are your bearing clearances that you're asking? Well, it's basically the thousandths of an inch of clearance or space between the crankshaft and your bearing surfaces. And what does that mean? Well, it's actually measured in thousandths of an inch. It's like barely a thickness of a hair. Now, why is that important? Well, too tight of a bearing clearance and not enough bearing clearance, or I should say, or your bearing clearances are too tight, and the crankshaft will tear up the bearings, and because there's not going to be any oil in between it. Too much, and you don't have any oil pressure. So it's very, very critical to get all these measurements right. And if you have your machine shop do the crankshaft correctly, and they line hone your main caps on your block correctly, then you shouldn't have any trouble. But this is what you do. You always double check. Take your time. Do it right. So now, why is it necessary to have these thousandths of an inch clearance? Well, because your crankshaft doesn't actually ride on the bearing itself. It actually rides on a thin film of oil between the crankshaft and the bearing. So your oil is basically is the bearing, really, because it's riding on the oil film and not actually on the bearing surface itself. So you're not having metal to metal contact. Your crankshaft is made out of cast iron or forged steel, and your bearings are made out of several different kinds of metal, even including aluminum, steel, and copper. Even there's like some of them are tri-metal bearings. and they don't actually touch each other when the engine's running. That's right, they don't really touch each other. That'd be bad if they did. So what we do is we measure, and it takes your time. So follow along as I get this. I got to get the block untaped from the paint job, and then we will get going here, and I'll show you what we do. It's not hard. It just takes some time and a little patience. There's that word again, patience. You got the block untaped, at least on the bottom. The deck surfaces are still taped. Now the main caps the bolts are loose except for these back ones. I'll have to figure. Yeah, they're all loose. Before you go taking these off and just throwing them aside for right now, be careful. There's some things you got to remember. Main caps have an orientation and a specific place where they go on the block. These all look exactly the same, right? These first four, and the rear main's always different. But these first four look the same on these 428s, and you don't want to mix them up. Now the machine shop, the reason being is because they were machined to fit in the block with the step. I'll show you around here on the front. You see up here where this line is at? They're precision machined for there, and when they line home the block, they're in a specific space. So in order to have a good measurement front to back, you need to keep them correct. Now, like my machine shop did, is it going to focus? There it is. See how it's marked 1, 2, 3, and 4. And of course, the fifth one's not marked, but because it's completely different. And they have this little triangle that kind of points towards the front, right? Oftentimes, sometimes you'll find an engine that's never been taken apart. They're not marked from the factory. Sometimes the factory marks them themselves. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason to it. And seeing how I never worked at GM back then, I am not sure why it would do that. Why they would mark them. Sometimes they were hand assembling engines. So we need to get the main caps off, and that's next. I need to get a socket, for this size. And I will set these aside. I'm going to go get a table to work on as well. I'll have a little workshop table out here because I got multiple things going on. And my shop is full of everything. Between the engine hoist, that engine, which is the 400 for the Impala, 428, parts on the shelf. I am tripping over my T56 Magnum, which goes in that car as well. And so I'm going to go get my... my sawhorses and put together a little table here so I can have some place to put tools and such. Alright, so we're going to take a little bit of oil here, and basically I just put a little bit on my finger with I just put a little bit on my finger right out of the bottle. Blueprint oil is actually blue. And I just smear it on the bearing surfaces like so. And I start putting the bearings in. The good thing about these Ford bearings is there's really, well, let me see here. There's really not a top and a bottom bearing. They're all, the tops and the bottoms are the same. I'm going to start with the thrust bearing. Now the thrust bearing has these copper edges on it. And all engines have this. So what this does is it's the bearing that rides when the crank goes back and forth in the block. And it goes on the Ford 428s, it goes in the middle. It's the number 3 bearing. And here's a tab. Let's see if you can see that. See the tab there? That goes in. And you just want to snap it. Push. Oops, I'm not really focusing on what I'm doing here. There, you just want to snap it in. Make sure it's nice and even with the main cap edge. Right? And then we'll do the rest there's a little tab. Focused on the right spot here. Nope, I'm off center. Well, there we go. So there's a little tab, and the tab goes in like so. And they kind of snap in a little bit, not really. They do collapse a little bit as you push them in. There we go. One more for the number one. Okay. Now this is ready. Now I gotta get the crankshaft out. Here's the crankshaft. Fresh back from the machine shop. And what I'm going to do first, even though they washed it, I'm going to hose it down with brake clean just to make sure it's nice and clean. So you can see what's going on here. And I'm going to take my rag here and start cleaning the thing. Making sure it is still nice and clean. It was bagged up. You can see the bag back there. It was all bagged up right after they washed it. So, clean the bearing surfaces. See, there's a little bit of dirt on it still. It was sealed in a bag, but it's been sitting in my garage for 6 months in the bag, so I'm just gonna make sure it is all. I'm gonna really concentrate on the main bearing journals, because that's what we're working with today. Oof. You get high from that carb cleaner. Brake clean. That stuff. Oof. There we go. And I'll clean the rod journals again when I get to the rods. Okay. Well, I'm going to tilt the engine back up. And what we're going to do is we're going to set the crank. We're going to set the crank in the block without putting any lube or anything on the bearings just yet. Okay. So it is heavy. So if you're not real strong, you want to get some help. This 428 cranks are not light. I'll tell you that right now. But it's not a big deal for me to put it in. Now that I said that, I probably have a big deal with it. So, come around this side, so you can see what I'm doing. Alright. What you don't want to do is drop it. So make sure you have your footing. Set it in nice and gentle. See? Nice and gentle. Make sure it rotates nice and smooth. And then we get out the plastic gauge. Alright, plastic gauge time. Okay, so it's hard to see on camera. There it is. See, there's the plastic gauge in all the mains, and it's kind of perpendicular, or I don't know how you pronounce, what do we call it, but the glare. Ooh, that glare is hard to see on that one. There it is, and there. Okay, so next we got to put the bearings in the main caps. So we put the bearings in the main caps, and then we're going to set the main caps in the block. So what I'm going to do to make sure that the main caps are seated again is I'm just going to take my dead blow hammer here, use the handle, and just tap it down in there. You can see how it taps in. You want to be careful when you're putting in the main caps so you don't knock the plastic gauge out of it, otherwise you'll be doing this again. There we go. And then we start. I'm just going to snug up the main caps like this. All I'm doing is bringing it down. I'm not trying to tighten them with this thing because you don't want to do that. So, okay. All you're doing right now. Now you want to have oil on all the threads of the bolts. I didn't mention that. So now that the bolts are all snug, time for the torque wrench, and you torque the bolts to the torque specs. You go up in 3 steps, and I forgot the torque specs, so. Excuse me while I go look up the torque specs in one of my old books. Probably should have done that before I started. So, the mains are supposed to be torqued to 105, but you just don't go straight to 105, at least I don't. I'm going to go, say, like 75, 90, and then 105. How's that? So it's 1. There we go. There's a pattern to this. Oops. It's my bumper for my other truck. I knew you. So we're at 75. Okay, we're at 90. Oops, I didn't do 75 there. Didn't do the middle one. You silly boy. Forgot to do the middle one. There we go. Now we can do 90. Alright. This is where it's going to start getting some tricep strength. Yeah. You can't see my right foot down here holding the engine stand from rolling. I'm using it for leverage. Sorry, I'm kind of working in a corner of my shop here, because I got so much going on right now. Oh, gotta do the middle one again. Alright. So now we go up to 105. Okay. I'm going to double check everything is correct. When you reassemble this for the last time, you want to double check all of them at least the second time over at the final torquing. Make sure you got it right. Alright, so what do we now do? We take the main bearing, the main caps off again. Yeah, sorry. Okay, so I have one of the bearing main caps here, right? I can see it right there. You can see the plastic gauge is stuck to the main cap, the bearing on this one instead of the actual journal. And what we're going to do is dropping my plastic gauge. Hang on one second. Okay, so you can see how they're marked out in 1,000, 15,000s, 2,000s, and 3,000s, right? So what we do is we take this tape and we measure across where it's been smeared by the torquage of the, I'm hoping this is focusing. Yeah. Of the, when you torqued it down, whereas this one is, the wider means it's been torqued down farther, so it's obviously not 1,000s. It's like 15 thousandths on this one. It's a little bit too wide to be 2,000s. All right, and 15 thousandths is about right, perfect. So this is the number one main cap. Hang on a second while I grab another one. Main cap back on. You can also measure if some of it sticks to the main journal here. See, there's some stuck to the main journal. And see, 1,000s. So it's right about 15 thousandths of an inch, which is about right where you want it in. It's within the range of what you want. Okay, so we're doing it again on number 2 here. And this one does not look like it's 1,000ths of an inch. It's more like 1,500ths because it's way too narrow. It's way too wide to be 2,000ths. So it's 15 thousandths on this one as well. Number 3. It looks like it's somewhere between 1,000 and 15,000, so it could be 1,250. So that one's a little bit tighter. Now I'm dropping bolts. I keep dropping my main cap bolts. Alright. And let's look at 4. Here's number 4. It's about the same, 15 thousandths there. So, and then number 5. Oops, don't want to drop that. Damage the bearing dropping it. So, This is going to be anywhere between 1,000 and 15 thousandths. Now you can do it the other ways. You can do it with a bore gauge, if you have a bore gauge, or you can do it this way. See, that one looks closer to a thousandths than it is 15 thousandths, which is on the bottom side of what you want for clearance. Let me look at my specs. Okay, so 15 thousandths to 25 thousandths is what you want for bearing clearances for the mains. 1 to 25 thousandths is okay on the rods. So these are at the bottom end for your mains for tightness, which is good. That means you'll have good long life and lots of oil pressure. You know, it's a little bit on the tight side if you want an all-out race engine, but this is a street engine, and I want longevity out of it. So what do we got to do now? Well, we got to pull the crank back out and use lube on the bearings, and then put the bearings back in and retorque everything again. So I got to pull a crankshaft back out. Let me get the main caps out of the way, and then I'll set the crankshaft aside, and then I'll lube the main bearings. I'm going to use lubriplate. My machinist recommends it's what he uses. So, and that's what I'm going to use to lube the bearings up. What we're doing is just we're going to put a liberal amount on the bearings like this. This basically gives it a nice coated surface to work on while you're trying to get it started before the actual oil pressure comes up when you start the engine. So this is what we're going to do on this. And let me stop here while I do that. And my camera's about to die. You can see the red light flashing, saying my camera's about to die. So we'll pick this up tomorrow. Alright, I redid the number 4 and 5 main cap plastic gauging because I didn't like what I was seeing, so I wanted to do it again just to be on the safe side. And on this one, I thought it was like reading a little tight, but it looks like it's right at 15 thousandths there, and 15 thousandths there as well. Yeah, which is what you want. Because if it is a little tight, what you can do is you don't want to take chances. So if it is too tight, then you give your machinist a call and you have him take the crankshaft and polish a couple, 10 thousandths of an inch off of it in order to get the clearance you want. It's better to take the extra time to make sure that you're going to have a long-lasting engine. If you're happy with what you have, then what you do is you take the main caps off again, and this time we got to pull the crankshaft out again too. So I'm going to pull all the main caps off, drop all the bolts again. Okay. This is where you hope you ate your Wheaties, because you want to get it out and not drop it back down on your bearings. Come on, girl. The number 1 counterweight, you gotta have it turned a little bit in order to get it out, because these two parts of the block the crank will actually hit those if you're trying to lift it out. So here we go, like that. Set it down. Now we take our assembly lube, which is lubriplate. My camera is tilting. Okay, there we go. Let me grab the lubriplate. This is lubriplate. I know. You're like me, your mind just went to the gutter. So, what we're going to do is, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tilt the engine towards you guys so you can kind of see what I'm doing here. I'm working in a tight corner of my garage between the Impala, the transmission, and the other engine in here. I'm running out of room. So I haven't used this stuff in a while, so it's probably good to shake it up. All right. Put some on the bearings, like this. And then you want to smear it out, obviously, you know. What's nice about this is that the engine's going to sit for a while before you get to it. It doesn't drip off. Some of the other assembly lubes are a little more liquidy, and they have a tendency to drip off. But this stuff, you can leave it sitting for a while. Now, I'm going to do the same thing to the bearings. But before I can put the bearings in, I got to put the rear main seal in, which is these two pieces. And the rear main seal goes in here, and it's very specific on which way they go. I'll show you here. Let me get this. So as the larger lip is supposed to face towards the front of the engine, and it's supposed to sit right in here. Okay. Now you're not supposed to have the edges flush with the surface. You're supposed to have them offset about 3/8 of an inch. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to pull this back out here in a second, but I'm going to put a little bit of sealant in here, just to be on the safe side, on the inside of the ridge. And then I put a little bit, a dab on the ends of the seal itself, and then you put it in at just a slight offset. So like one part is going to be down a little bit and one part's going to be up a little bit, like that. Okay. So I have the rear main seal in on this, and I have it in the main cap here, and I put a little RTV along the back edge of the main cap where it meets the block at the very back edge to help kind of seal it a little better. Between the two meeting surfaces here. Now it's going to be all right. It's not very thick. It's just a little tiny bit because this is a machined surface. And then I got to lift. You can see how I've got the all the main bearings coated with lubriplate. Now I'm going to lift up the crankshaft and put it in. Here. Nice and easy. It doesn't want to go in. Oh, there it goes. these big throws on this crankshaft, they gotta be angled a certain way. All right. Oops. Making a mess. Just gotta make it a mess. Get the bolts. Now you can see that the main cap isn't, let me look at you, what we're looking at here. Yeah, the main cap isn't seated quite yet. You can see how it's got a little bit, it's sticking up a little bit, so you take like a dead blow. You want to get it seated. You don't want to seat it with using the bolts. Just use it, see how it's pretty much seated now. There it goes. All right, and the oil and the threads of the bolts are covered in oil because you don't want to have any burrs or anything like that, and you don't want to have the threads sticking, messing up your torque readings. All right. So now I'm going to do the rest of them. See that, and I didn't even pay attention there. This is number 4. Yeah, I left my dead blow over there. So, same thing. Woo! Rocking the camera. Here we go. See how the threads are good? It's going in nice and easy, like that. All right, I'm going to do the rest. So, we got everything snugged up. So we're going to do our last and final torquing. So I'm going to start at 75 foot-pounds, like I did originally when I was doing the plastic gauging. I'm going to make sure that it still rolls over smoothly. See how the crank still rolls over smoothly? I'm going to keep doing that after I check, after each step of the torquing. Because if it doesn't, then we got a problem. And it's best to find out now than it later on. Okay, so we're at 90 and it's still rolling over nice and smooth, as you can see. Now to go up to 105. Okay, now we're at 105. Excuse me. And it's still moving very, very easily. See? If it doesn't want to move, if it's bound up, then you got a problem and you need to talk with your machine shop right away, because if you try to keep going at this point, you're going to have an engine that fails pretty fast. Okay, so the last thing we want to do is check the thrust. And that's what the thrust is, how much your crank will move forward and backward. All right. Now your thrust bearing is the one that controls where it rides on. When it goes through, the crankshaft will go backwards and forwards in the block, but it's only a tiny bit. So what we're going to do is we set up a dial indicator here. See, there's a dial indicator. It's on a magnet. And it's zeroed out. Oh, it's not quite zeroed out. Ooh. Okay. And then we're going to just take our pry bar here and move the crankshaft back. Oops. Going the wrong way. All right. That's all the farther she goes. So it's 6 thousandths or 65 thousandths, and the specs are for this engine 2 thousandths to 10 thousandths. So it's not over 10 thousandths, it's not under 5 thousandths. So it's right where it needs to be for your thrust. That is the last step for installing your crankshaft. And as again, you can see how she moves nice and simply. There is a little bit of resistance. There should be a little bit of resistance. It's not going to free play, especially with the lubricate assembly lube in there. So let me take this off. Alright, now you got the crankshaft in. What's next? Putting the pistons on the rods, gapping the rings, putting the rings on the pistons, and then installing the rods and pistons and rings into the block onto the crankshaft. And then we do the plastic gauge all over again. That's on the next video. That's a longer step. That takes a while. But, like I said, I can usually do this crankshaft install in about a half an hour if I'm not stopping to adjust the camera. So anyhow, if it takes you 2 hours the first time, so be it. Just, take your time to give yourself an afternoon to do it and do it right. So follow along on this. If you enjoy this, if you have any questions, please ask me in the comments below. I will try to answer every single question that I get. And next will be the rods and pistons. So if you like this, please comment, like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and we'll see you on the next video. Maybe it'll be on the 400, and maybe I'll have more room where I'm not cramped in a corner of my garage with my life vest hanging over my shoulder, so from my boat. So thanks for watching.